Oh my gosh. I was muted. I am sorry. Why? I thought I had everything together. I thought I was being so professional. Oh, wow. Okay. We will repeat. I basically was just saying, are we live? I think it's live. Yay, it works, kind of thing. And also I was just saying the video looked a little dark to me, but I think it might need to be slightly dark today because we're doing foggy scenes. It's a little bit hard to see when the colors are so subtle. So take a look at these paintings and tell me if that looks okay for you guys. I can change it if we need to, but this is kind of the thing, basically what we're doing. We're doing like very soft, misty, foggy stuff, and you'll need to be able to see it. If it's too bright, I think it'll like white it out too much. So hello everybody. Hello everyone who just came over from Twitch. We had a fun warm-up stream over on Twitch before this started, and I'm gonna try to do that from now on because it just helps me get in the mindset, and it's fun to hang out with you guys beforehand. I don't think I missed anything in chat. Just everyone saying hi. Looks okay. Okay, awesome. I'm glad. We'll keep it as it is then. And I am just a little bit early starting because I wanted to make sure people had time to like filter in, and I wanted to make sure I had all my stuff set up and that everything was working properly. So it was more saturated on Twitch, but I think your cam does that. Yeah, either that or I'm wondering if I like somehow had configure video. Maybe I had the settings changed. I can kind of increase the contrast a little. Maybe that will help. We'll try this. How does that look? I think increasing the contrast just a little will help be able to see. So, I mean, this is what I was painting on Twitch, which was pretty colorful compared to the soft scenes. So that's different. Need to grab your stuff plus a snack. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, if anyone is transitioning from hanging out on Twitch to over here, grab some water, grab some snacks, get all your paint stuff ready. We will be starting soon. We'll be starting off with a little bit of some test sheets. Also, let me know if the music is too loud. Some of the songs get really loud. Welcome to Misha and Ellie and Fiona. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Corvulus. I am using Pretzel Rock Radio, which is just like a synthwave playlist right now. So I don't really know what to expect from it. Hi, Woosie. The magical mod is here. Hey, Hanpan. Thank you. Okay. I have to brush black cat hair off my supplies. Oh my gosh. Victoria, I had to remove cat hair from like almost all of my pans today. I was sitting there painting and I'm like, wait, thinking it was dirt, but it was actually just like hair. There's still a few in there. Hopefully they won't. The thing is, I'm usually like, it doesn't matter. But the one time I'm trying to paint like a big soft gradient, a big soft sky, there will be a huge black cat hair in the middle. Guaranteed. It's like the law of watercolor states that there must always be cat hair in the sky. Hairfoot woke up, so I'm going to pretend I didn't hear him. Well, now you can have an excuse because we already started and you can't back out now. You can't join, but I'm at work, but I can. Oh, but you can watch for a while. Okay. Probably Corvulus. That's where all my paper goes. Different username. Oh, Hannah. I kind of thought it was you actually because Han. I just assumed actually. All right. My coffee that I had for the Twitch stream is by now very cold and gross. But I have water. Brushes are ready. Excellent. I don't need markers. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I can show this. That would be very convenient. Yes, I have watercolor splatters on here, but it's okay. I'll start off by showing you some references. And I do have some references available for you guys to look at today. Are you a BTS fan? So I actually just found out who that is like last month. Don't judge me. I have heard K-pop and J-pop and all the pops around like through watching Twitch streams, but I never really like looked into what the bands were. And then the other day a video was recommended to me that was something like the most popular artist of all time, because I follow one musician streamer or one musician YouTuber, and I think I get recommended videos based on what people like who follow him. So anyway, that came up and it led me down this like rabbit hole of looking at the biggest musicians of all time, and it led me to BTS, and I was like, oh, that's who they are. So anyways, long story short, no, I'm not a fan, but I know who they are. I mean, I don't dislike them, I'm just not a fan, and I don't listen to them a lot. Like, I know they have pretty hardcore fans, so. Hey, Barman. Alright. So we have a couple minutes before we're gonna start. We will begin. I should make some kind of like useful intro for my paint-alongs. Hey Rue, you made it. Lurkin. I just was on Twitch, Varmin. You missed it. We came over here from Twitch. But we do the paint-alongs on YouTube because usually the replays go straight to my Patreons, and it's much easier to just give a link to my Patreons after the stream than it is when I used to do it on YouTube, or when I used to do it on Twitch. I had to like download the video or save it to my own hard drive and then edit it down and then upload it to YouTube and then share the link. It was like a whole huge thing. So this is much easier. So Bought a 12 by 12 Arches cold press black paper. Wait. Black? They make black paper? Are you sure it's not just the front page? There's, when you open the Arches paper block, there's one piece of black paper that covers it to protect it. Are you sure that's not it? If they make black paper, I'm gonna have to look into that. Like, actually, I can show you. Well, I could have showed you if I still had one. Too bad you can't host on YouTube on Twitch. That would be really cool if I could do that. Like, get some cross-pollination going on. Oh, look, this is the one that's on the screen right now. I didn't know that. Yes! Okay, I was like, how Arches doesn't make black paper? That would be amazing if they made toned paper and stuff. But yeah, it's just you slide a palette knife or even a credit card or something into that slot that's on the top, and you just slide it around the edge, and it rips the glue off, and you reveal the first piece of paper. You didn't buy you did, Woosie, didn't you? You couldn't get into Twitch? You couldn't get in? What do you mean? It should be public. I don't even think you need to have a username unless you want to chat. Unless they changed that, which would suck. Yeah, you did. Okay. Have my notes. It is time, you guys. It is past 3 o'clock. It's 3:01, so it's time. All right. We shall begin, I think. Unless, should I wait just a minute or should we just start? See these okay, right? I know it's a little reflective. My camera is in there, like, reflecting. I knew this would drive people crazy, so I'm wiping off all the fingerprints. Where can I tilt it so that there's no reflections? It's like you're either gonna see me, hi, or the camera. If I stay still, it's a little bit better. All right. First time in chat, will be good to catch a live. Hello! I love seeing people's usernames that I usually recognize from comments. A lot of people are like frequently comment on videos, and I kind of get to know them through that. But then when they finally visit a live stream, it's really awesome. So yeah, I guess we're just gonna get started. And since this is gonna be, since it's a stream, there will be a replay. I've been thinking maybe we'll decide by the end of today's paint-along, but basically I'm thinking we might leave the replay live for public view because it's my 4-year Patreon anniversary. 4-year paint-along anniversary. And that's a pretty big deal. We've been doing a paint-along every single month for 4 years, which is crazy. So I thought it might be kind of a fun celebration, a good one for it to be public, because usually the paint-along streams, the replays are for my Patreons only, as like a way for me to thank them. So yeah, because I do the paint-alongs, I specifically do them because we meet a goal every month on Patreon, which now that I say that, that's even crazier because it means we've hit that goal every month for 4 years. It's so wild. You guys are amazing. Thank you, everybody. It kind of snuck up on us, I think. I feel like it was just yesterday that we were like 3-year paint-along anniversary. But anyways, happy 4 years, everyone. Some of you have been doing the paint-alongs with me for almost that whole time too, which is even, that blows my mind. Okay, so welcome to Paintalong 48, right? Well, we're doing a misty, foggy landscape today with watercolor, and I am going to be going through a couple reference photos first, and we can talk about things, and then we'll do a couple test, what do we want to call it? Like test squares on some paper, doing exercises that get us warmed up and get us thinking about water control, because the reason I wanted to choose a misty or foggy landscape is because it basically forces you to practice water control, and I constantly want to practice that because the better you are with water control, the better you will be with all types of watercolor landscapes. And it's just one of those things that you have to do over and over again to get good at it. So there's no shortcut. But I hope that today, whatever we go over today, will help you guys get better at your water control, and we'll also paint a scene together after that. So to start off, I thought we would look at a few photos. And if anybody has any questions along the way, try to tag my name because it highlights it for me. Otherwise, I might miss it. But continue to ask your question if I miss it, because I try not to miss anything. This is an iPad 12.9, I think. The biggest one. It's a few years old, but it's awesome. So for the beginning, I'll show you guys a couple examples as well of actual paintings, but for the beginning, I just want to look at a few photos. So these are all photos I've taken between 2016 and now in Scotland, and Scotland is amazing for misty landscapes because it seems like it's always misty somewhere. So I go out and I do lots of hikes, and anytime we go anywhere I bring my camera, so I'm always taking reference photos. So I can share a few of these with you guys today, but basically what all of these have in common is that there's some kind of fogginess or mistiness involved, and we can look at several of these today as inspiration to create our own scene. So if you type !ref, R-E-F, there is a collage available that you guys can use as reference, and I think you've probably already seen a few photos that are in that collage. But you can really use any references that you have, or even look online. But one thing I want to point out is that pretty much what all of these have in common, besides being foggy or misty, is that for the most part, the colors are very muted, almost monotone sometimes. It depends on the scene, obviously, but in general, the colors will be much more muted. And another thing that they have in common is that the elements in the background, the distant forms, they usually appear much, much, much lighter and just very, when we think about them in watercolor terms, they're very diluted. The colors are diluted, and the foreground elements are more like silhouetted. So when we're doing our watercolor, that's one thing I want us to think about, how the distant elements are much softer and more diluted with water. Maybe you can even use just monotone. You don't have to use lots of colors if you want to keep it simple. And then in the foreground, we'll have some more silhouetted or darker elements, and that's gonna make the background pop, and it'll make that background mistiness really look even more dramatic. So that's what I wanted to look at these reference photos for. And with that in mind, put this over here. Would it be a good idea to divide a bigger paper into sections for the exercise? Yeah, I'll talk about that now. So I am going to be using, this is a piece of Arches. It's I don't know what size they call it here in Europe, but it's half of a 9 by 12 inch piece of paper. So just a regular piece of paper that came off of a paper block like this. This is a piece of my Arches 9 by 12. Basically just cut that in half, or you can put tape on it, whatever you want. But basically for the start of this, I'm going to use a piece like this. We'll do all of our little tests on this piece. I mean, you could even use more than that if you want. You can use 2. And then we'll paint on, I'm probably gonna paint on this. Maybe I'll go bigger, but you don't have to go too big for this, I don't think. Okay. Oops. So there's a couple different things that we can do to start off. And let's see, I'm gonna get my pencil. If you want to use a ruler to make it a little bit more, to make it straighter and more, to make it look better, go for it. Actually, I'm not gonna bother with a ruler. Excuse me. But what we need to do is divide this into 4 sections. So you don't even have to draw squares if you don't want to, but basically you want 4 boxes, I guess. And one of them should be a little bit bigger. So I'll do like that. That's my biggest box. And I'll just make them, I only need a couple areas. Of course I have like an itchy throat as soon as I start the paint along. Yep, I will try to explain as much as I can along the way. Right now we're just going to do a little warm-up. This is a good way to start off, just getting kind of loosened up and thinking about water control. Put this over here. We're going to do a couple different tests. I actually wrote it down. We're going to do what I guess I would call a flow test, an active test, which basically means we're going to have wet paper and we're going to touch in a couple colors and see how much they spread. And the reason we do that is because when we're actually going over to our painting where we're going to have like flowy colors, it's really, really useful to know which of your pigments flow the fastest and flow the most. Or like if you want to use blue, how much does your blue spread? And we'll do that. Well, we'll get to that in a second. We'll also do a gradient, which will be my bigger square. We'll practice a gradient, and I'll show you my favorite way of doing a gradient, and it's really easy to follow. We'll also do one where we lift the clouds or the fog off of the paper after the pigment is on there, and that's a really easy, common way to get like nice, soft, fluffy fog. And we'll do one of those where we like wait. And then we'll do one of those where it's like immediate right after it's wet, and then we'll do one where we wait just a little because it does make a difference if you wait, and we'll see how that goes. You get to see the reaction. I think we should actually start with the gradient because, no, I lied. We'll start with the active test, the flow test, because it's not as, it's easier basically. So what we need to do is get one of those squares wet. And I am going to use a decent amount of water just so it's fully saturated in there. So if I tilt it, you can see there's a sheen to it. Where's the light? I guess you can kind of see it. It's not like dripping off my page, but it's pretty wet. The more water you have on there, the more your pigment is gonna flow pretty fast. But like if I was wetting my paper before I painted it, this is how I would do it. And then with a brush, I want you to choose either one of your blues or a green, or if you don't have any of those, if you don't have green, you can make your own green, mix your own green with yellow and blue. Or you can choose your black or grayish color, whichever one of those you have. I have neutral tint, which is a Sennelier color. It's like a nice dark, but it dries kind of gray. And the first thing we're gonna do is just touch it to the edge. And we're gonna watch it. And we're gonna pay really close attention to how it spreads and how it dries. How far it flows just from that one little dot. And on the other side, we can touch in our blue, because blue, we a lot of times use that in the sky, so it's a very common color when we're doing this kind of flowy test. You can tilt your paper a little if you want to see how much it will flow, but I'm kind of just keeping it flat in order to see how active it is on its own. You can see that the neutral tint I have is very active and it flowed immediately and it actually spread really far. But the interesting thing is like most of the pigment stayed here, but then like a very diluted version spread out like really, really far. And the blue this is Ultramarine Finest. It's not really moving that far, but I am getting a nice soft cloud, I guess I would say. And if you want, you can test out any of your other colors. I think I'll test out my green, which is just like perylene green. It's like a dark green. The reason I do it on the edge of the paper is because the edge of the square is because I want there to be like a solid part where it's solid color, and then part of that goes into the wet, because that's a common thing I do in my paintings. I do like some parts of the brush stroke will be dry and then other parts will be wet into wet. So for me, that's just like a really useful little test. And already you can see how much that's spreading. This is starting to dry, and you can see it's like dry, it's like pushing back on itself, so it's giving me some really weird splotchiness. So these are all things that are really important to pay attention to, and they really help when it comes to just understanding your particular colors, because your colors are going to be very different from my colors. We could even try, I don't know, purple or pink or something. This is Potter's Pink with a little quinacridone magenta, and wow, that is spreading really far. That's actually way more active than I thought it was, so I'm glad I tested that. The granulation will kind of stay right there, but I think the quinacridone magenta that's mixed in is the one that's spreading. So yeah, that's the flow test. And we'll let that dry, just kind of let it do its thing. Don't mess with it too much. Next, we're gonna do the gradient, and I'll show you my favorite way of doing a gradient. It's so easy. What I like to do first is mix, if I'm doing a nice even, if I want to get a nice even wash of color, a nice even gradient, I'll pre-mix a pile of color, because you don't want to, like the last thing you want to do when you're trying to get a soft, like foggy scene is accidentally touch your brush into your color and realize you have a chunk of blue on it, and then you touch it into your painting and it's like irreversible staining chunky color in your soft sky. So that's a no-no. So I usually touch my color and make sure it's nice and even, there's no chunks or anything, or cat hair if you can avoid that. And you can also get it a little bit diluted if you need to. So there's one color. And just for fun, let's do a gradient from a blue to a green, just because. So we'll mix a little What do we want to do? Do you want to do... We'll do the bright green because it's just more noticeable. So this is Serpentine Genuine, and it's a pretty granulating color. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. So there we go. Now I have my 2 piles ready. And what we're gonna wanna do is tilt our paper. So if your paper is attached to your table, or you cannot tilt it, don't worry, it'll still be fine. But I do recommend tilting it to be able to use gravity to your advantage, even if it's just like this much, like a little bit, or like that even. Just a little bit helps, and it'll help the pigment just continuously flow instead of getting stuck on any one part of the paper. So I'm gonna start with my blue, and this is how I will do it pretty much every time. Start with a line, get it as even as I can, reload my brush with more blue, do another line kind of overlapping that line, reload with blue, do another line overlapping until I get maybe like midway down the paper, and I'm reloading every single time. And then I'll touch my green and mix it with my blue a little bit and do a line of that. Touch more green. Each time I'm reloading a little bit more green until the end when it will be pure green. So it's up to you to decide. Like, this is why we're doing this test, because you learn how much pigment you need and how much water you need to get a nice soft gradient. And unless you do this multiple times, you'll just never know. Then you can use a paper towel to squeegee up any of that excess. Because if you let that dry, if you let that droplet or that bead of water dry on your paper, or if you just like set it down and let it go, it will flow back into your nice soft wash and ruin it with a bloom, or like they also call it cauliflowering. Basically, it will just flow back into your paint and give it like this really splotchy look. But I will also point out that this method is a little bit trickier on hot press. If you're using hot press paper, like I know Leslie likes hot press. Oh, I hate hot press. It is very hard to get nice, smooth, even gradients without any streaking on hot press paper. It's possible. It just takes practice. Watercolor or cold press paper is much more forgiving, and it absorbs a lot of that pigment in that water, and it just gives you more time to kind of play with things. So it's much easier to avoid streakiness with cold press paper. But that's pretty much it. And now we have our nice soft gradient, and we can let that sit. All right. So those are the top 2 things I recommend practicing for starting, just to kind of get used to water control. We're gonna do a lifting. So one way that you can do clouds or like fogginess in your scene is either by using very diluted washes and just slowly building up the layers, or you can do you can like drop clear water into your pigment and let it flow, and it kind of like sometimes will flow and look like a cloud. It's a little harder to control that. It's possible though. Or you can put your pigment down, like your sky color or whichever color, and lift up the pigment with a brush, clear water on your brush, no other pigment, and you can lift soft clouds out of your pigment. And it's a little tricky at first, but I think the more you do it, even if you do it 3 or 4 times, you'll see how easy it is for your pigment. And the reason I say mine is splotchy, do you think it's because I'm using cheap hot press paper or gouache instead of watercolor? Oh, both. If you're using really cheap paper, it's very hard to get nice, soft gradients. And gouache is even harder, especially if you're diluting it at all, because gouache, I think like the physical properties of gouache, it's a little heavier and it sits a little bit more unevenly. Whereas watercolor, like the binder, when it's diluted, it's like it's a very even material, an even medium. So I think you're going to be struggling on both of those fronts, but in a landscape, it'll be much easier, I think, for you, because we're not just doing like a perfect square. You know, it doesn't, like, if I made a mistake in there, it would be really obvious. But in a landscape, it's a little more forgiving. Before we do the lift thing really quick, I want to point out, so these are just 3 of my most used colors. This is the neutral tint, this is the Pareline green, and this is the Pareline green and Pareline violet. And when let's get a brush. If I let my pigment dry on the paper, it is really, really difficult to lift it up in a nice, pleasing way. So if my brush is wet right now, this is completely dry. It's been dry for like 3 hours. If I want, I can get my brush wet and I can start scrubbing away. So you can see it's still possible to lift up that pigment, especially if you have a nice like a brush with really hard bristles. You can really scrub it away. Sometimes it's impossible to get rid of a hard edge though, like on this side you can see you can still see that line there. So if I was trying to do this with a cloud, it would be noticeable. Like that line would haunt me forever. So this is a really good test on, I recommend doing this for all of your watercolors, all of your colors, just to see how easy it is or how impossible it is to lift it up, because some colors are staining and they will not lift up. They will be like, no, resisting. Like this one, Pareline violet is pretty staining, so you see those lines on the edge really, really noticeably. Neutral tint, again, very staining, and I'm scrubbing like crazy right now and it's barely coming up. So again, if I was trying to do a soft cloud, that would be a nightmare. That's if you let your watercolors dry first. So now we'll do a test where it's wet paper and we will fill this in with a nice blue. And we'll lift up with a clear brush. So you'll see the difference. Hi Acorn. Do you use ivory black? No, I only have neutral tint. That's my only like blackish color, or grayish color. However, when I'm painting with gray in a painting, I actually like to mix my gray rather than just use that color on its own, because mixed grays I feel like look a little bit better, a little bit more natural. Alright, so as I said, we're gonna fill in, we're gonna pretend this is a sky, and then we're just gonna fill it in with blue. So get some blue on there. This is actually like a tiny crash course exercise for skies and clouds in general. And if you guys didn't know, my tutorial for painting skies and clouds is coming out on July 1st. So I am working my butt off on that behind the scenes. Okay, so now we have our sky. Depending on how staining your color is, this will be either easy or difficult. But we're gonna straight away take a nice clean brush. I'm using a round brush, and I'm going to, it's clean, it just has a tiny bit of clear water on it. I'm gonna lift and wipe it off on my paper towel and lift and see if I can make a nice soft If I come back in with water, and I have my brush pretty wet and I try to do that, the water on my brush is going to start spreading into that color, and I'm gonna end up with, most likely I'm gonna end up with a bloom or like a cauliflowering effect, which can be an actual strategy. It can actually look really cool in some landscapes, but also it can be a nightmare, and it can ruin your sky if you don't want it. So it'll be noticeable in a second how hard that edge is gonna be compared to this one. And you can even like pick up a little with your paper towel, and yeah, you can get a nice big soft spot, but when that dries, it'll be, because there was extra water in there, it's gonna have a little bit of a weird edge to it. So we're almost done. We just have one more little test, and all of these things will be used in our painting today. So I hope you're paying attention, or at least trying it on your own. Trying different tests on your own. The longer you wait to lift up your pigment off of the paper, the more likely it is going to be stained. So if you want it to be really soft, you have to be really quick. And also, I want to demonstrate what happens if you keep fussing with it. So this is something I do all the time, and I ruin paintings. I continuously mess with my painting, and I accidentally get like splotchiness, or if I like touch it with my paper towel and my paper towel has a hard edge, I end up with a really uneven area. What if the paper starts coming off? Ooh, usually that's a sign of not so great paper, like cheaper paper. If you're using expensive paper, it shouldn't do that. If you're using even halfway decent paper, it shouldn't do that. So I don't know if it's obvious, but when I went back in and I messed with that after the fact, I accidentally stained my white spot, so I've ruined it. Well, it wasn't, you know, it could still pass, but depending on what you're trying to do, you could have a problem there. So you just my rule of thumb is if try to mess with it as little as possible, basically. Like your wet layers, you get in and get out and stop touching it, because the more you do, as the paint starts settling, the more you're going to end up with, like, you could end up with problem areas. So what was the last one I was going to do? Oh, the last one is a similar thing to this, except we're going to fill it in with blue. And then we're going to drop in some clear water, and it's going to flow. It's going to spread. So just fill it in with blue. And then clean your brush off immediately and touch in clear water and let it flow. I'm tilting my paper a little bit so you can see it's pushing. And this is another thing that I occasionally do in my skies if I want to create more of a spontaneous effect. So if I'm trying to get like wispy clouds or streaky clouds kind of like running down the page, I'll do something like this. It's a lot trickier and it's more unpredictable, and it can lead to crazy results. But it's also sometimes the most pleasing, and it can be gorgeous if you do it right. I mean, by now you guys probably know I prefer more stylized paintings. I like really loose, spontaneous washes and like really cool textures in my paintings. So a lot of these techniques, you can use them for if you're interested more in hyper-realism, but I'm not into that, so I'm not going to show you like how to do a hyper-realistic painting. That requires just like insane amount of study and observation and practicing drawing and all of that. So if you're interested in that, you can use the techniques we talk about, but you're on your own journey there. I'll show you really quick. I was showing this earlier on Twitch, but this is an example of what I just showed you, where I had color in the sky and then I dropped in clear water. But this one I actually also used granulation medium. So if you look up close, it has crazy granulation. I was just testing it to see what happens, and also seeing how dark I could go with my anthracnone blue. I was kind of testing that out as well. So I'm trying to hone this skill of using as little control as I possibly can in a painting to get pleasing results. So for big stormy skies, I want to get flowy, lots of movement, but without having to control the exact placement of it. So this is something I'm personally working on, and it's an ongoing struggle. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things that just takes lots and lots and lots of repetition. This is another example of something similar where I'm using more just wispy clouds. This is wet blue, light blue, really wet, and then I drop in darker blue or darker grayish blue and let it just flow by tilting it and turning it. And this is the one I just posted yesterday, I think. So this is a YouTube video yesterday, and it's the result of like an hour-long session. So it's like me trying to control every single aspect, yet still get like that soft mistiness. And it is not my favorite way of working. I prefer to have like a little bit looser style, but I was trying to get a specific look. So all right, I am going to be using, I think, this size paper today. Thank you, Rue. This is a little warm-up I did earlier, and if you look at this reference photo here, I used that as very loose inspiration, and I just tried to get as light as I possibly could. My goal for this was to be very, very, very light and foggy, almost like a frosty winter landscape or something. And for today's painting, I was thinking of doing, like, we can use some of this strategy, but I don't want to be, mine isn't going to be as light as this. I want to have a little more contrast in mine. So I think we're ready to start. Are you guys ready? Hopefully that was helpful for some of you guys. And the reference that I gave you, let me find it on my screen. Here we go. So there's 3 different photos on there. 2 of them are more of like a countryside farmland with fog rolling across the land. And the one that's on my screen right now, this one, is more like out in the west coast of Scotland, where the oh my god, the stormy skies move through so fast. So 1 second it can look like this, and the next second it's like bright, sunny, blue skies, crazy. Definitely need to use Arch's paper. Oh, I'm sorry, your paper was having problems. Hey, Majid. Okay, I'm glad it was helpful. I felt like sometimes when I'm doing stuff like that, I'm like, is this like too basic? Are people like impatiently just sitting there like, come on, let's go? Hey, Gino. Okay. Yeah, so we are going to be doing, let me get the collage up on my screen. I don't do those warm-ups before every painting. Usually if I'm trying something new, I'll do tons of random tests and little things like that. It just depends on what I'm doing, honestly. Warm-ups are really helpful. Oh, yeah. Well, it does really help if I'm trying to do like if I'm using a big piece of paper but I'm nervous about it or something, I'll just do a bunch of little studies on a small piece and try different techniques and just see which works best, especially because I'm using new colors lately. I am still trying to figure out how they dry and how they interact with each other, and that can be like it just need a lot of repetition. So I have tons and tons and tons of little studies and little tests everywhere. Like all my surfaces in here are just covered in paper. So I actually painted, let's see, the collage I gave you guys. Where'd it go? This collage I gave you, I have painted the bottom right one as a landscape in gouache on a YouTube video. So if you're interested in that for gouache, you can check out previous YouTube video. And it was a really fun one. But for today, I'm using, this is actually something I do for most of my paintings, is putting up a bunch of, like, tiling my screen with references, have something that inspires me in every single image. Maybe it's the colors in one and a lighting in the other and the forms in another, and I use that as loose inspiration, and then I just design my own landscape. But if you guys want to, for today's paint along, you can copy one of those photos exactly. If you want to like use the forms in there exactly as you see it, that's totally fine. I'm probably gonna do a combination of them. So for instance, I really like the mountains. If we're looking at the reference photo collage I gave you guys, I like the top right mountains in the distance and kind of the darker sky, but I like the colors in the other two. So like slightly warmer earth or rustier earthy tones in the foreground on those other ones. I think I'm going to include that in mine. And I'm going to do like the bottom right photo that you see in that collage. It has little farmhouses and trees and stuff. That's kind of where I'm going to lean towards. I don't want to do the mountains quite as big in mine, I don't think. So I'll zoom in so you guys can see. If you want to watch my sketch. Let's see. Maybe just like they could work well for painting underwater deep sea vents. Oh yeah, for sure. You do value studies in graphite. That's a really good idea as well. I definitely recommend lots and lots and lots of value studies. In fact, like even if you want to today, to keep it really simple, if you want to focus more on water control today instead of color, you can just do a monotone painting. In fact, a lot of the references I have on my laptop or on my iPad, so many of them feel more monotone because that misty, moody atmosphere that happens kind of reduces a lot of the colors, and because there's so much moisture in the air, it blocks a lot of that bright color reflecting back to you. So just like a super quick way to do a misty, foggy looking scene is to go monotone. It automatically just like makes your mind think of those foggy, misty scenes. Okay, so I am going to start sketching. So basically, for mine, I'm thinking of a mountain. Leave some of the sky showing through. Maybe this isn't a mountain, it's more like a hill. And it kind of leans down like that. So I'll draw it a little darker. And maybe there's like a little pond or something. Or a loch. But over here, there's gonna be like a little farmhouse. really like not the focus or anything, but the overall misty landscape is going to be the focus, and there's going to be trees near mine. So here is basically my very simple, I'm just doing trees near my house, my farmhouse. One thing I really like about misty landscapes is when the trees kind of poke out of the fog, and it's really good practice for doing soft glazing as well. So this, for instance, is something we can practice today, and I'll show you how easy that is. Hey, Amelia. And then maybe having some mountains in the distance. And just gonna have like lots of open space here. Roughage on the fields and stuff. Could even have like a hint of a fence somewhere. Okay. So once you guys have your sketch ready, or if you're copying one of the reference photos, just, you know, you don't need to go too overboard with your sketch. We are going to be using lots of washes though, so I mean, you don't have to draw it too dark, but just know that sometimes the wash of color you do is going to erase your sketch. So if your sketch is important to you, if you have to have your sketch, try to use a little bit of pressure so it stays on the paper. But I don't want to go too dark with mine because I don't want it to be showing through the mist as much. I want it to be very soft. I don't have my paper tape down because I'm going to be tilting it and tipping it as I go. If yours is taped down, just know that like it does help to be able to tilt it because gravity is your friend. But you can also use like this. You can tape it to a board and then, or even just clip it to a board like that. And then you have a nice solid surface to work on, and you can, oh, I can't use this one because I have my Patreon. These are actually going to be, these are all the, I'm going to paint the 20 highest mountains in Scotland, mountains and Munros, and then I'm going to cut them out and make these into magnets for my patrons. And I really don't want to ruin those, so we are going to just freehand it. We're just going to hold on to the paper. I'll show you that it's fine, you can do it. You don't have to fuss around with tape. So I'm going to use, yeah, they're each 1 inch by 1 inch. I'll be working on them on Monday's Twitch stream if anyone wants to come hang out and watch that. And oops, I think I'm actually gonna make a few extra for myself because I really like them. They're so cute. Why are little things so cute? Okay, so one thing I want to make sure I do in this painting is, I mean, it's always good to go in with a strategy. So you can see my sketch here. I have a kind of a hill started here, a mountain behind my farmhouse, and I have another mountain off here in the distance. So what I'm gonna do is lay in my sky color, and then I'm going to immediately put in some clear water and kind of brush it away from this mountain in the distance, because I want there to feel like the fog is settling into this valley. So at the base of this hill, I want it to be very soft. We'll come back later and do the actual form, the actual hill itself, as well as after that dries, come back in and do the foreground. And we'll kind of just like slowly move forward, but that's our first wash is just a soft color in the sky, which for me is going to be more of a grayish blue. And then we'll just soften this edge right here. So that's my plan. One thing you can do to make it a little easier on yourself is to, anywhere that you envision fog or like a heavy misty cloud, you can lay in clear water. Just know that anywhere you put water, if you touch pigment into that water, it's going to spread and it could potentially fill that whole area. Which is why I like being able to tilt my paper, because then I can control which direction it flows. Yeah, they're going to be little magnets. I'm going to laminate them and then put little teeny magnets on the back of them. So I'm mixing some anthracnone blue. It's my new favorite blue, basically. I love it so much. And a tiny bit of neutral tint. And it's going to give me like a really soft gray, bluish gray. And then I'm just going to fill my whole sky. And I'm going to dilute it as I get down. I'm not going to add any more pigment now. I'm just going to keep getting my brush wet and dilute it and bring it down. Doing that same kind of gradient strategy that I talked about before. And if I need to, now that I have that in there, I'm going to get my brush cleaned off with clear water and just kind of lift up a little bit of that near the mountain. So that's basically it. And I'm just gonna watch it and kind of babysit it a little. If I see any areas like pooling up with pigment, I'm just gonna slightly squeegee that up with my paper towel. Because again, if we let it pool up, we could potentially end up with a backflow and it'll like go back into our sky and we'll get that blooming thing, which may or may not be desired for you. It's not for me right now. I do use it quite a lot in my landscapes, especially for trees, but I don't want it for this. I'm just tilting it so that if I need to, I can make sure this bottom area doesn't fill up with pigment. So if I need to, I can clean off my brush and just make sure there's not too much water on there and just lift up a little bit more. But again, as I said, we want to touch it as little as possible, because the more we do, the more we could potentially end up with like splotchiness, or you could accidentally get a chunk of color in there you don't want. Oh, that's right. I forgot to ask. Oh, hey, Jared. I forgot to ask. I usually do this, but if anyone is painting with me, like you're actually out there painting for the Paintalong, please press 1 in chat. I love being able to see. Alright, so mine is pretty much, I just have to let it dry now. No more fussing. .5? Oh, you're doing digital. Ooh, how fun. Wait, Leslie, are you doing gouache for this, or was that just for your warm-up, just to start off? So we want to make sure that this dries before we do anything that could potentially touch that blue area, because anything you do now near that area, if that's wet, it's going to flow into it. So we don't want our foreground stuff to flow into that sky. And we want to remember that anything else we do, especially in this background area, we need to make sure we don't go overboard with color. We want to make sure we don't go overboard with values, because if we keep these background areas a little bit more muted, the colors a little bit more muted, and our values a little bit less contrasty, it'll just feel much more misty and foggy, because that atmosphere is going to look a little bit heavier back there. So this isn't something I would always do, but just for today's demonstration, I am going to come back in with another layer on top of my sky to show you guys something. You'll see. I just want to demonstrate a couple different things if I can. I want it to be as helpful as possible, so. Suck up all the knowledge, yes! I know, there's so many painters. That's actually really exciting. I thought there were like 3 of you. It's always fun. And we did a Twitch stream before this, and we came over from Twitch. So I think there were actually more people hanging out here than there usually are for the paint-alongs. And that's more than fine. You guys can hang out and lurk and just have this on as background noise. One thing I like to do is tilt it to see if it's like shiny at all. If it's shiny, it's obviously still wet, but otherwise, if you can't tell, you can sometimes touch it, and if it's like kind of cool, usually it means it's still a little bit damp in the fibers. But you can also get one of these. It's a heat gun, or you could use a hair dryer, and you can speed up the drying process. So I'm gonna do that for mine. So we have a dry layer now, which is good because now we can come back in. What I like to do for my mountains in the distance is use the same exact color I used for the sky. So I have my puddle. This is the exact thing I used to do the sky. I'll use that same color and pick it up on my brush. And I'll actually dilute it just a little bit. So like I'll take that color and put it over here with a little bit more water, just so I don't go overboard because I want it to be very subtle. And then I'll paint in my mountain or hill or whatever you want in the background. Does a heat gun blow less? I think so. It doesn't have a lot of, it feels like it doesn't have a lot of air coming out, but it's hot air. So you have to keep moving it so you don't like fry it in any one spot. Okay, so I have 2 brushes actually right now. This one is completely clean. I just have clear water on it. If I want my fog to be settling between these 2 hills, like kind of heavy in this valley, I will do a little water right here. Like just a little, 1 brush stroke of water. And then I'll take that blue color that I did for the sky, but slightly watered down, and I will paint in my sky. And I'll take it all the way to that clear line of water I just did. And then as I kind of watch it dry, as I kind of monitor it a little bit, I can take my clean brush with clean water again, and I can kind of lift up anything if it's too much. But for me, that's okay. It's very, very subtle. This is like the slow game, guys. I just want to make sure that this background is nice and soft and subtle because it'll make it feel like the atmosphere is so heavy back there. And when we add our front layers and they're a little bit more contrasted against that background, it'll just make it pop even more. It'll make it more dramatic. If you do it this if you do this method, it's so much easier because you can just slowly build it up. You don't have to worry about getting it perfect the first time. That first brush stroke doesn't have to be perfect. It's a very relaxing way of working, I think, compared to my, sometimes I do it, it's like very wet and wild, and it's kind of more chaotic, and we've done a couple paint-alongs like that. I usually call them expressive, like, we're gonna be really expressive today, and some people love it, some people absolutely hate it. I love it. It just forces you to get loose and let go of some of that control. Okay. For my, I don't know if you guys can see, but I put a little bit of like the edge of I guess I would call it a pond. And I'm gonna use my same diluted blue color and just fill in a little bit of that. So that basically that's reflecting the sky color right now. And it just kind of reminds me that that's there. And now I'm kind of thinking about my strategy for the rest of it. So this foreground hill here is going to be, I'm going to use that same bluish color, but I'm going to slowly start introducing green and kind of some more brownish earthy tones as I get closer to the base. So here along the base of this mountain, I'm going to keep it really soft again. Kind of thinking about how the heaviness of the fog likes to sit above this valley, this field. And so right here, it's going to be a little bit softer again. So I'll touch in color down into a clear line of water here, and then continue that color all the way down to the foreground. And here and there, I might introduce like just clear drops of water, just to kind of let it flow and stuff. Depending on how much room you have, you can get really fun creative washes. I don't have a ton of room on this piece, so I'm going to be a little bit more controlled. But I have to make sure it's still a little bit wet. So back to the heater. Moving my microphone way up there so it's not next to me. Need to find a hairdryer. The only reason I usually don't use a hairdryer for the paint along because I want it to be like real time in case someone out there doesn't have it. But I feel like it's actually useful to watch what I do before you do it in this case, so it's okay if I'm a little bit ahead. Really enjoying this. First paint along. It's downright zen. Even with the hairdryer, is it zen? Welcome though. I'm glad to see you guys. There are a few new people here, which is really exciting. It's always humbling when people want to learn how I do something. Okay, so I'm gonna lay in a clear wash of color over it's like literally straight over my barn and the trees there. Just so I have it so that stays kind of nice and foggy. Just kind of like across that area. Right where the base of that mountain is, where I think, you know, the field will start. And now I'm thinking about my mountain color here. So I'm gonna take the same sky color, which was my anthracnone blue and neutral tint. And it's kind of like an indigo. If you only have a dark blue or an indigo, it's basically that. And then next to that, I'm going to mix in a little of my perylene green. So I'm going to start introducing a little green. I usually mix stuff on the paper when I'm just working on my own, but for this example, I think it's helpful to have pre-mixed piles because I think that's what most people prefer. So So that's more of my green pile, although it's kind of hard to tell. Maybe add a little more. And then I'll also do a pile of more earthy. So I'm going to do some yellow ochre, Indian red. No, wait, I switched out my Indian red. This is English Venetian red. And quinacridone burnt orange. But just like really subtle. It's kind of a gray. And I'll even do a little neutral tint in there to kind of gray it out, because I don't want anything too bright yet in this background area. All right, just in case, in case that dried, I'll put another line of clear water there. Because I'm a little slow sometimes when I'm mixing. Oops, that is not dark enough. So this is a good example of practicing water control and mixing color. I need my foreground mountain to be a little bit darker than this background sky. Otherwise it won't even show up, or it'll dry lighter and look really strange. So I'm making sure that's a little bit darker. It does dry lighter, so this is another reason you want to get familiar with your colors. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. And you can see I'm just letting it flow down into that line of clear water that I did. And I'm going to start getting that green mix that I made and introduce that into a couple spots. If I feel like I need to, I can come back in with some clear water and kind of like touch it in and let it flow. I want it to be really heavy sitting there. Basically, since my barn is going to be red, I don't have to worry about leaving it. I don't have to worry about leaving it white. I can just let it cover up. If you were going to do a white barn or something like that, you'd want to paint around your barn. I'm going to take some more perylene green and mix in a little here and there. It's just like the most subtle hint of it, and then a little bit of that orange, brownish tint that I had. Just let a little bit of that rest. On there. I'm going to wrap it around my pond a little bit too. And if this dries lighter than my pond, I'll have to come back, but at least now I kind of have a starting place. Because sometimes, like again, I'm getting used to these colors. I don't know exactly how light this is going to dry yet. It's kind of a good test for me, a good lesson. And now is where we start to get brave, because I'm going to be touching in wet into wet. But hopefully you can see already that by doing that initial line of clear water, the pigment didn't really settle right there, so I still get that soft mistiness. And even if you touched a little water up into that mountain, that hill, like here, I kind of went back and touched the green into it. It gave me like almost a little cloud form there. So it can look like it's heavy cloud sitting or fog sitting on the mountain, which is kind of nice. Sometimes the spontaneity of watercolor works in your favor. It's like, oh, it did that. Yay. Thank you, Jennifer. That's so awesome. I really appreciate you telling me too. Okay, so there are going to be a couple trees here. I can't do this too early, because if I do it too early, it'll spread too far. But I'm actually going to try to use blooming to my advantage now. So what I'm going to do, do not try this at home, but actually you should try it at home, because you should always try things. Experiment with your colors. I'm going to touch in this is a little bit of Serpentine Genuine. It's a very bright green, very granulating, and it usually results in blooms if I put it on wet paper. but I sometimes have to wait a little bit longer. So I think I may have to wait. But what I love about blooms in misty landscapes is that it actually just looks like the tree is emerging from the mist almost, and I love that. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's really cool. I like to use it to my advantage. For more of like an expressive landscape, it works really well. Appears there's a tiny subtle bit of blooming that creates a drizzly effect. Yes, exactly, Kathleen. And see, it's already happening here because my pigment, it had water on my brush and pigment, and it's kind of pushing up against that. If I add more green, the longer this dries, the more dramatic that will be. The way I don't know exactly how that works, but basically what I think is like this pigment is drying. It's settling into the fibers of the paper and kind of like getting into place. And then I put water on the paper, and even if this is only like the slightest bit damp, the water that I add to this area is going to start pushing anywhere else it possibly can. And if it pushes into those damp fibers, it'll disturb the settled pigment, and the settled pigment will start to like be pushed away. And it'll leave you with like this hard wall of pigment around your new water. Does that make sense? So if I wait a little bit longer, that bloom might be more dramatic because the pigment is starting to settle more, compared to if I got the page wet, I put pigment down, and then I immediately touched it with more pigment. It wouldn't really push each other. It would just all flow evenly. But I like this because it almost feels like there's some trees peeking through the mist there. But I'm still using really subtle colors. I'm not going crazy with that. And then I can even come back and with my brush, I'm gonna use a small brush just to do this a little bit, but I can use a clean brush and I can kind of soften some of those edges if I need to. Maybe a couple of them kind of go up the mountain. Hi, Pink Flamingo. You're doing the rock Skillshare? Thank you, Lily. You guys, I really appreciate that. It's so funny to me when people like to say they like my teaching style, because I don't know, I don't see myself as a teacher, even though I tell people the way I do things. Hi, Wade, you made it! And this is a case where we want drama. Okay, well, I'll show you then. One thing that we can do to make this appear even more misty and more foggy, I can get more of that blue sky color that I made that's a little bit darker, and I can do another layer. And I'm gonna tilt it down a little bit. And I can get almost like a reverse bloom effect, maybe. It might push down into my trees that I was putting there. Though this is really hard for me to do in real time because I am used to working really fast, and when you work fast and you know exactly what will happen when you do a certain brush stroke, trying to slow that down a lot in order to explain it, it's like, wait, what is the timing of this? Oh god. Like it always gets me. But this is a great practice for all of us for water control. So me being forced to slow down a little bit is good for my personal growth with water control. So some people, like, again, if you don't like the blooming effect, don't feel obligated to do it, but if you like it and if you want to experiment with it, these foggy landscapes are an awesome time to do that because it kind of is very conducive to that. I'm kind of leave this area a little bit lighter, so I'm picking up some of the pigment, wiping it off, because my house, even though my house isn't white, I want it to be pretty noticeable there. Why do I need to approve all these messages? I know, why is Wade getting blocked by the bot? It's hard to paint slow, isn't it? It is so hard, it's so different. Okay. The foreground is gonna be fun because it's just like big, loose. I'm gonna use more expressive marks in the foreground, but so what I'm gonna do in the foreground is a combination of dry brush and wet into wet. So I'll do a couple clean brush strokes of water. This is like my favorite way to do like big Scottish landscapes because they're very they have so much variety of color and texture in the ground cover. There's some parts that are really, there's like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. You know what I'm trying to say? You get it? You can read my mind, right? I'm gonna do big, bold brush strokes here and there with much brighter color this time. But it's gonna dry more subtle, so it's not gonna end up being too bright. But basically, I want a couple spots that look wet into wet and a couple spots that are more dry brush. And we can come back in with a more texture on top, more of a dry brush look on top. So that's my first layer. You could just use a solid green color, and that green color, if you're using, like if I did a couple brush strokes of clear water and then touched in big brush strokes of pigment, and it's gonna bleed and flow into each other. And if you're just using green or like variations of green, it looks awesome because it just looks like the moor, like the moors that you see on the side of the mountains and in the valleys. It's so pretty because it's got so much, there's like dark greens and olive greens and lime greens and bluish greens. So that kind of gives you a natural variety. Okay. I'm gonna add, I think that's dry. Oh, it's not dry yet. One final thing on this mountain here is I'm going to do a little bit of some, I guess, texture, like sorry, excuse me. Like if you look at any of the reference photos and you look at the side of the mountain, it's not just like a solid blue mountain, although it can be, because sometimes like really, really misty mountains will be there'll be like a solid gradient of bluish gray. Wait. Wade, why is it making me approve all of your messages? Welcome. An attempt at patience. Oh gosh, pink flamingo. Yeah, sometimes it is totally an attempt. You know what would be fun if I redid, or as I was waiting for this to dry, if I did another version of this in like my normal speed. It'd be fun to see those side by side. Yeah, so. Oh, I said I was gonna do a misty, cloudy thing in the sky, wasn't I? I'll do that last. So if you want to join me and add a little texture to to side of your mountain, I'm just gonna do a couple like just loose brush strokes with a slightly darker blue, just to give a little variety to that. And it just fades down into here. super thorough in our teaching. I know I'm probably too thorough. I'm probably like boring everybody. I'm sorry. I try to think of it as like, okay, if someone is picking up watercolor for the first time or doing a specific thing for the first time, what would, if I were in their shoes, what would I need to hear? So I'm going to touch in a little more green as well because I want it to kind of bleed into it as it gets closer to this foreground. Bleeding is your friend when it comes to misty landscapes. So I'm still not going crazy with color. It's keeping it pretty soft, but starting to get a little more pop in some spots. I can't even see my sketch anymore, by the way. I have to like invent my barn again because I don't know where it is. It's fine. It's not boring? Okay. Well, I guess if anyone was bored, they would have left by now, so. I think it's right here. So let's drop in a barn. I'm gonna use a diluted version of my English Venetian red because I want it to be kind of like a red barn, maybe even a tiny quinacridone magenta. If it starts to bleed too much, I will immediately stop and I'll clean off my brush and let it. That actually worked pretty well. It's still really misty. And I had a happy little accident where I left a white piece of paper and I can use it as the roof. So there's that. But I'm using like really diluted pigment there. It's nothing fancy. I'm also going to use a palette knife to Is the barn area supposed to be wet? Mine is dry, so wondering if I should re-wet. If you want to get this softness, it's a little bit easier. However, another strategy that you could use is this. So if your paper is dry and you go in and you lay your barn in there, and this is like the side of your barn, but you want the edge to get a little bit softer. Actually, that's a bad example. Let's do like a dry brush. So there we go. So there's our barn. That's the side of our barn. And you're like, oh no, I want the side to be really soft. Take a damp brush, not dripping, just damp, and swipe it along the edge. And it'll start flowing into that brush stroke that you add. But if it's too wet, it's gonna be really hard to control. So I usually just keep wiping my brush off, wiping it on a paper towel, and then I'll pick it up and I'll brush it across there. But just continuously do that until you get the soft edge that you're looking for. Or you can re-wet it and try to very carefully place it, but just know that potentially that could spread throughout that whole clear brushstroke could be filled with red. Just be careful. But again, that's so much that water control is exactly what we're practicing today. So, well, I was gonna use a palette knife, but I don't have time now. Basically, what you can do if you have wet paper, you can actually scratch with a palette knife. So sometimes I'll do that for trees, like tree trunks, or a fence. Like say I want a fence here, I'll come back in with a fence, and it'll be really subtle because it's not like I'm actually coloring it, but it'll hint at the shape. It's really easy way to get super, super, super thin defined lines. Like below my roof maybe. Oh, I guess it is still dry, or still wet. Sometimes it doesn't show up straight away either. You have to like continuously, you have to like scratch it and wait and see if it shows up, and then scratch it and wait. If the paper is more wet, sometimes there's like a slight delay. This isn't really a barn, is it? It's more like just a house chilling on the side of a hill, because I don't have a lot of green fields going on where most farms are near green fields. So I might add a little green down here below that fog. Just a little. Wait, knife edge. The knife edge, I'm literally scratching the paper. So I scratch the paper and I physically dent the fibers, and the pigment settles into those dents and gets a little darker. So that's why you end up with a darker line. You can also scratch the paper so hard that you remove any of the pigment that's there. I've seen people do that. You can do that with your fingernail, you can do it with a palette knife, a credit card, whatever. You can actually use that to draw with, like, to get a white mark, because you're actually like scraping it away. But I actually use it for the opposite. I use it to draw darker lines. I think it works really well for that. Okay, I'm just softening that green I put down. Okay, in my foreground, I'm gonna do a dry brush across this mistiness. So my brush is not dripping or anything. It's just full of green pigment. And I'm gonna do just a couple marks. So depending on what color palette you're going for overall, you can kind of play with, oh my god, there's a huge piece of cat hair there. It's not worth it trying to get it out. Yeah, so since I'm going more for like a green field, I'm adding a hints of green to mine, but you can stick with whatever colors you're comfortable with for your landscape. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to copy me if yours is leaning a different way. And yeah, I can also start doing the trees that are not misty or foggy. Perhaps they are slightly more silhouetted, so we'll zoom back in. A couple trees that maybe are like popping up above the fog. And then I'll just come back in with a clean brush and sweep the bottom of those clusters to make it look like they're poking their heads above the fog, just to soften the bottoms. So can you rewatch the paint-along? Okay, so usually after the paint-along, I make the video private for my patrons. And I still haven't decided what I'm doing today because it's our 4-year Patreon, our 4-year Paintalong anniversary. I thought it might be kind of fun to allow the replay to be viewable on my YouTube channel, like just for the public. But I don't know. What do you guys think? I think my patrons would be fine with it. It's more about, for me, it's more of a concern of, is this actually helping anyone? Is this a useful tutorial? Because if not, then it's, you know, it's one of those learning experiences for both me and you. And I can try to do better next time. Okay, so the last thing I'm gonna do, which could potentially ruin the whole thing. Actually, I won't do it on this. I'm gonna do another really quick piece just to show you guys my normal speed for working and how I would utilize the stuff I showed today. Somewhere I have... There it is. It is? Okay. Well, maybe I will leave this for viewable for the public then, because I've been wanting to do it for ages and I never felt like it wasn't the right time. But then when I realized today was the 4-year Paintalong anniversary, I was like, oh, that's kind of special. Maybe that could be like a fun one. You missed a big portion earlier. Okay. Yeah, then... You know what I could always do? I could leave it for viewing and say, like, you know, in a month it's gonna be retired to my Patreons. Like, it'll be up for a month and that's it, and then you, if you want to watch it, you gotta go check it out on Patreon. I mean, okay, there we go. So I'm gonna set this aside for just a second, and I'm gonna do, I'll basically show you how I would do this scene if I was by myself in my studio, not showing anyone how to do anything, just to show you the workflow, I guess. I don't know if this is actually, if anyone wants to watch this, but I'm doing it anyway. Sounds plenty fair. Yeah, I think that could work, right? Maybe I'll just say that. That's tentatively what's happening. Anyone who's still watching, anyone who's watching the replay, this is available for you to view for now. And on the next full moon, it shall be taken away. No, I don't know. 3 full moons from now. On a random day and time, it will be private. Show us. Okay. Okay. So I remember where my mountain is. I'm usually much more experimental when I'm just doing stuff on my own. So yeah, sometimes it's crazy. To me, this feels more like Scotland. Basically, dramatic AF. One thing also, this is a good example of something I've been practicing lately, is pulling my colors. So if I put a line down of a pig, so my neutral tint, for example, is very dramatic and it just spreads like crazy. It must have like extra oxgall in it or something. But if I put a line of that down and I put another line next to it of clean water, I literally pull the pigment into that wash just by the adjacency of it. So that second line I did is going to be the soft edge, which is more unpredictable, but I think it leads to more interesting results. So it's something I've been practicing and trying to figure out more with my colors, and just, you know, seeing what happens by doing it over and over and over and over and over again. Oh, that raining effect. That's what I love about it too. I love that it's like a wall of rain, you know, that feeling. And that happens a lot in Scotland. Like, you literally see the wall of rain coming towards you. In the distance, it's like, uh-oh, we have to go. Okay, so now for the one I showed you guys, this one, obviously it's like much more subtle, because I was thinking it's really good to practice this as well, because building up your layers and practicing that water control is the only way you can get to the point where you can start having a lot of fun with it, I think. I mean, you can always have fun with it, but doing it in a more controlled way first gets you used to it, and then you can utilize what you learned there to manipulate it in a really pleasing way. But a lot of times without that, those initial tests and those initial I wonder what happens when I do this kind of things, then without those, I would have never gotten to this point where I can feel like I can just throw paint and water around and make fun landscapes. It's like, for me already, this version is a million times better because I love more expressive stuff in it, and I want the paint to do its thing, you know? But I know everyone has like their own preferences when it comes to styles of painting, and I try to do the paint-alongs in a way where you can use what I show you to do either or. You could use it to do the more expressive, crazy stuff, or more controlled, slow-paced stuff. At this point, I would be introducing salt into the mix, but it's in the kitchen right now. Wolfie keeps yelling at me for leaving the salt on my desk out here. Yelling. But instead of salt, we can just do this. We can get some crazy flowscape. And we can do the palette knife. Okay, sorry, I like zoned out for a second. Wall of rain, yeah. You know what I mean. The wall of doom. The worst is when I'm out painting and I see the wall of rain coming and I'm like, oh god, do I pack up? Do I like try to rush back to the car, or do I just let it happen? Little bit of pot of salt on my desk. That's a good idea. I really should do that because I use it so much. But I love the grinder, because the grinder I can get either really coarse salt or really fine salt depending on also I'm gonna darken this so you can see. Sorry, the camera was like so bright for some reason. So that one versus this one. This one is obviously not quite done yet, but you get the idea. But the workflow that I did to get this one is much more of my normal style, the normal way I like to work, compared to this one. Let me take that off so it's not so in the way. I definitely recommend trying both styles just to see what you guys prefer. You might not realize which way you lean until you try either one a few times. This one, what I would probably do once this dries is come back in and do like trees peeking up through the mist, and maybe just defining some more rocky, grassy forms and stuff like that in the foreground. But like this is basically what I would, if I was outside painting in the field or near the mountains and it was crazy weather like this, I'd be doing it this fast because sitting down and doing like an hour-long painting is not going to work out for you. In the midst of the weather, like if you're painting fogginess, it's most likely going to rain on you at any second. So having maybe both skill sets is useful depending on what you're doing. Yeah, okay. So does anyone have any questions? Do you have any... Is there anything else I could demonstrate really quick? Or are we good? I feel like at this point, if you were following along today, you kind of get the idea, and now it's just up to you to go practice it and do that repetition. Same way it is for me, because like saying all of this is much different than actually doing it. So I have to continuously practice, and water control especially, it just is one of those things you have to keep going with. I call it mileage. Get that brush mileage. Keep going. Do tons and tons and tons of test paintings, trying different amounts of water versus different amounts of pigment, so you can really see how your paint flows, because every brand is different. Even every color is different. So you really got to get that brush mileage. It was fun. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see your gouache painting. Thank you guys. You didn't like your first one. Not giving up though. Honestly, I don't really like this one, but it got the point across, I think. Like it's such a different way of working for me than my normal way that I enjoy working. So, this was good for being able to explain all the different things, but then this is like tomorrow when I pick up my brush to start practicing again, this is the kind of direction I lean. So maybe I'll show you. You better show me. Oh my gosh, don't tease me. Speaking of which, I'm just kidding. I'm not pressuring anyone. But if anyone joined in the paint along today and painted something, I would love it if you just took a quick photo of it above. If you just snap a photo with your phone. You don't even have to crop it or anything, and email it to me or post it on Twitter even, and tag me, whatever you want. And I make a collage of these every single month. I have 4 years worth of collages, and it's so awesome to see everyone's color choices and the different designs that they do. If you want, you can remain anonymous. Otherwise, I put your username on the collage next to your painting and share it. I post it on social media to share it, and it's just awesome. I love the collages. It's like one of my favorite things. So please, please, please send me your painting. If you want, you can redo it. You can do it multiple times and send me whichever one you want. I will probably post the collage on Tuesday, so if you can send it to me by the end of Monday, that would be perfect. First one has a lake. I imagine if it was your first time doing misty stuff or foggy stuff or whatever we talked about, it could be a hot mess. Mine feels like a hot mess too, but it's just part of the process. The first few times, I think, you just are getting used to how your paint flows and like how much water you need to use, how to like remove pigment if you need to. There's like so many things that go into it, and it's just, yeah, I understand if it was kind of crazy for your first time. I don't think, well, maybe I know them. Angela Fair. Maybe I do. I may have seen their stuff. So I guess if that's it, if no one else, would love to see your technique for foreground grasses of the reference photo. Do you have a tutorial on grasses? Oh, of this one with the bright grasses in the front. I don't know if I have like I don't have a tutorial just for grasses. For me, actually, you can watch the video I posted yesterday. That might help a little bit. But for doing backlit grasses, it's more of a matter of just painting around your bright color, right? So for me, I like using palette knife. I like using stuff like this where the pigment is flowing and you can like tilt it to make it flow even more. Or I like using salt because the salt gives a beautiful natural like ground cover texture. Or if you're doing... Oh my god, I just flung orange paint on this one. Okay, we're good. We saved it. Jeez. Okay, so we're gonna dry this really quick. Dang, that's hot. Yeah, so this is the one I was talking about. I posted a video of this one yesterday, and this was again more of like a very slow layered approach to it, to this type of scene, but it definitely works. But this is obviously not really backlit grass. It's more just like big clusters of grasses and bushes near the pathway. So you can watch that video if you want to see that strategy, or I'll show you really quick how I would do backlit grass. Either I would do a couple things. You can, in terms of brushes, I would use one of these three or all of them. Basically a very soft fan brush, because when it gets wet it ends up looking like that, and that gives you pretty much perfect grass marks and comes in handy for that, for doing a lot of them at one time. Or you can use a script brush kind of like that, or a rigger brush, and when that gets wet it looks like that. So it's a very, very, very fine point, and that's good for single pieces of grass. Or you can do a more chunky looking style and use a flat brush like that, and when that's wet you can get if you tilt it to the side, you can get super, super fine lines. I think it takes kind of a longer time, but basically what you could start off with, if you have a fan brush, you would maybe use your darker green, and let's go way down, get close. Pretend this is the base of this is the ground. This is the foreground. Ignore that. And oh my god, I just touched my painting. Rip. Just ruining all the paintings, guys. So what I do is think about how okay, if my bright green grasses are sticking up, they're basically they're like going up like this. I have to paint around them. So I'm gonna be doing lots of brush strokes like that, and trying to let some of those long ones peek up here and there. And back here, I'm filling it in with dark, because that is the only way to make the foreground look bright. So you have to use that value difference. So if you do this like over the course of a huge area, these look like bright green grasses sticking up in front of darker grasses. You know what I mean? Does that, wait, that makes sense? I hope that made sense. I did that really fast. If you only have a single brush, you can like try to paint around them and it takes forever. You can be really, really careful and tedious, and really just try to like paint around long, tall grasses, but it's so hard. Or the chunky style, you can like, you know, it's really, this one is harder to get like thin pieces of grass, I find, but if you combine that with the other kind, you may get the point across, or I don't know, but it's so much harder, I think, with a flat brush. It's good for gouache. Actually, you wouldn't really do that with gouache. Gouache, you're just building up your layers, so the brightness would be painted on. But you know, if you back up and you imagine this in front of this field, the white, the tan, the orangish color grass, and the background is green, it would still stand out to you as grass if you were looking at it. Okay. Any other questions? You didn't see that? Wait, you didn't see which one? I was about to say, or we should go raid someone, but we're not on Twitch. So I guess we're just gonna end. I'm gonna go make dinner. I'm gonna make stir fry and have some wine. Chill out on the couch. So yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with me today. And if you're watching the replay and you have any questions, feel free to comment below. To everyone who painted with me today, please do send me your results. Again, if you want to remain anonymous, that's totally fine. Just let me know. But I'd love to be able to add it to the collage. And a huge, huge, huge thank you to my patrons out there for supporting me. And you are literally the reason we do this every month. And the reason we've been doing it for 4 years. So thank you guys. Yes, have a great night, everybody. I'll be back streaming on Monday on Twitch. So if you want to hang out in a longer stream, you can come over there and hang out with us. I'll be finishing the tiny Scottish mountains. I like love tiny things. I don't know. They're so cute. I'm trying to get them really detailed too. So I have a few more to do on these, and then after that I'll be doing some landscape stuff. So hopefully I'll see you guys over there. Wait, it blocked your message again. Oi. Alright guys, have a wonderful weekend. Try to get outside if you can. I don't know if the weather will allow me, but I will try to anyway. And yeah, have a wonderful night, everybody. I'll see you soon.